Okay, Minister Balakrishnan, Deputy High Commissioner Julie Hetchka, and Mr Choi, the Permanent Secretary. I want to welcome you and everybody else here today. It's my job, I've got a very easy job today, to welcome to the stage our MC, the person who's going to manage today, Dr Bill Fu. So thank you, Bill. Bill, of course, is the head of ANZ Asia here, but of course he's also a doctorate of our university and we're very proud of him. So welcome, Bill.
Well, first, let me wish you a very good afternoon and thank you very much for coming. And that in a few moments, we'll be kicking off with our speakers, where we will be inviting the minister to the podium. But let me just give you a very quick rundown about what we will be doing. Firstly, of course, we want to thank the minister and also Professor Mike Kingsford for speaking to us today. So in between our various courses and all that, we will be having two speakers, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll have the Q&A. So that's where you can ask all the questions relevant to the issues of global climate and also environment concerns, because obviously this sort of affect all of us here. And on behalf of JCU, I just want to say that it has been a pleasure for us working with JCU. I think it's hard for them to tell how good the work they have done, but I must say that in the last 10 years, it has been my privilege and honor to work with JCU. I remembered that they started with only about 50 students, and today they have about 4,000 students. As a comprehensive university back in Townsville, and today, in my view, they are the most successful foreign university campus here. So with that, may I invite the minister to the podium to start with our first of the distinguished speaker. Yeah.
First, thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to you as well as take your questions later. I think the first order of the day is to tell you to please continue eating. You'll notice I was hurriedly trying to gobble down some food, so I'll have some calories, enough to sustain my brain as I speak to you. But I do want you to carry on eating. This is Singapore, and in Singapore we're always in a rush. And we're always trying to do several things at one time. And food is a very important item in Singapore as well. So please eat. I just ask for your ears. I don't need you to focus exclusively on me. So thank you again for this opportunity to be here. And it's I'm very encouraged to see such an eclectic group of people. I mean, there's some old friends here, as well as people who are not Singaporeans, but I've just had an opportunity to interact. Some of you, I realize you've been here for 15 years, 20 years or more. And clearly, I think we're amongst a group of old friends who know Singapore well. I basically wanted to leave 3 points for you to consider today. The first is the increasing level of environmental risk factors, which you need to be aware of from a business point of view, as well as from an academic point of view. So the first factor, risk. The second theme is on opportunities. The same environmental challenges and risks are also going to provide business opportunities, and that's something which we should keep in mind. And the third point is on the role of academic institutions such as James Cook University in the face of the changes and the challenges which are going to occur in the environmental front. So let me now move on to the first point, risk. The world has changed dramatically in the past decade. And in fact, when my staff were preparing this speech, I myself was amazed when I saw these figures. So let me give you a few examples. Global GDP per capita has increased by 1.5 times in the last 10 years. 1.5 times. Another example, fixed broadband internet subscribers have increased 4-fold in 10 years. The world is more connected, always on, always connected, in real time. Even, this is a statistic which I suppose the bankers would love, even the number of billionaires has grown by almost 50% in a short span of 3 years. This is according to Forbes magazine. The number of billionaires increased from 1,011 in 2010, and apparently now the world has 1,645. Again, a dramatic increase. But in the same period of time, in the same decade, total greenhouse gas emissions have been the highest ever in human history. In fact, I'm tempted to say the highest ever in planetary history, because these are emissions due to human beings. And depending on your point of view as to how long human beings have been around, certainly for a much shorter and more recent period in planetary history, these are unprecedented levels. So for instance, we emitted about 49 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent in 2010. We lost 13 million hectares of forests every year. 13 million hectares every year. And the amount of waste that the world has generated has doubled in a decade. And as more and more of the world develops, India, China, Africa, as places catch up, as per capita income increases, more important, as consumption increases, the tax on the environment in terms of resource depletion and pollution load can only increase. And I think all countries are slowly coming to terms with this reality and have come to the realization that you can't just have economic development without having regard for a sustainable environment. I mean, if you take the biggest engine of growth in the last couple of decades, China, even China has now reached a position where sustainable environmental strategies have become a political necessity. The people are demanding for it. When they wake up and they see air which is not clear, when water is not necessarily safe to drink out of a tap, when people worry about food prices, the point is that now, regardless of whether you're in a democracy or in a communist regime, people everywhere in the world are concerned about environmental risk. In Singapore, we've been very fortunate that our first generation leaders, led by Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, were environmentalists way before being green was fashionable. And let me give you a few examples of that. Right from the beginning, Mr. Lee realized or appreciated the fact that because Singapore is so small, because everybody lives next to someone else, because my backyard is your front yard, because we have no natural resources and we didn't even have enough water to drink, this issue of sustainable development and of the economy growing together with environmental protection has actually been hard-coded in our developmental agenda. You see, we can't afford to generate and dump toxic waste in Singapore, quite literally because there's no space to dump it. If I was to dump it in my backyard, it is in your front yard. Another example, for all these years, even though a coal-powered fire station, and we used to have them. If you go to St. James Power Station, now it's a hip, happening place. We used to have coal-powered fire station. But in the early decades of our existence as an independent state, we didn't have it, because instinctively Mr. Lee understood that there would be a heavy price to pay if we polluted the air that we breathe and if we didn't see blue skies in Singapore. So we have always had to ensure a high quality living environment. One of the paradoxes in Singapore is that we've had to be superlative, we've had to be good at several things, not just because we are ideologically committed to being excellent, but because these are essential survival strategies. And I'll take the other example of water. Since I think there's a fair amount of Australians in the audience, let me expand on that point and put a historical perspective to this. In World War II, when the British surrendered Singapore to the Japanese, actually the Allied forces outnumbered the Japanese. And in fact, Australians will recall that there were Australian reinforcements that were landing in Singapore at about the time of the surrender, who were then promptly marched off to the prisoner of war camp in Changi. One point which has always fascinated me is, why would a defending force in an apparently impregnable fortress called Singapore surrender to an army with smaller numbers and apparently less well equipped? Without getting into the details of it, I will leave you one point to consider in this, and it was that even before the Japanese troops physically landed in Singapore, they had already secured our water supplies. You see, the reservoirs in Johor, which even to this day supply almost half our water supply, the water catchments in Johor are multiple times the size, the land area of Singapore. By the time the Japanese had secured the reservoirs and the water supplies, resources in Johor, the writing was on the wall. Subsequently, when Singapore became independent by being kicked out of Malaysia, Mr. Lee took the precaution of attaching the two water agreements with Malaysia as appendices to the separation agreement. We must be the only country in the world whose independence documents contains water agreements, because he understood the extremely political and strategic significance of water to Singapore. So those agreements were stapled to the separation agreement and lodged with the United Nations. Anyway, the point I'm making is that water has been a crucial, strategic, existential issue for Singapore for all these decades. But precisely because we had our backs to the wall, the PUB has spent decades trying to expand water resources. So when we were independent, we had 3 reservoirs. Today we have 17. About 2/3 of our land area in Singapore today is a water catchment area, and that includes the city centre. Most people would not think of a drain in the city as a source of drinking water. Well, in the case of Singapore, every drop is used. More importantly, a key breakthrough occurred a decade ago when it became commercially viable to desalinate seawater using reverse osmosis. The membranes were not invented in Singapore, but nevertheless, because this was a key obsession of ours, we are today probably the nation with the most wide-scale application of reverse osmosis to generate water. And the proof that this strategy worked occurred just 3 months ago, when there was a drought in this region and when there was even water rationing in a neighboring country, and we did not have I did not lose sleep over it because we had generated sufficient infrastructure to ensure our water needs. So the point here is that a key strategic risk was converted into an opportunity. And today, our companies, whether it's High Flux, Sembawang, Keppel, or many there are over 100 Singapore water companies, now can chase opportunities in other parts of the world, including Australia, I hope, using as their calling card the fact that I'm a water company, I'm from Singapore, a water scarce place that has substantially solved its strategic challenge. In the energy space, now energy is important because even if you join the dots back to water, with reverse osmosis, as long as I have energy, I can produce water. So the point is that water is no longer the constraining issue, but energy is. Where do you get the energy from? How much are you going to pay for it? Is it going to be stable? Is it going to be secure? Is it going to be reliable? So energy has also been an existential issue for Singapore. And especially given the fact that in Singapore, we don't have a drop of oil or a molecule of natural gas. Yet, despite that, Singapore has remained one of the largest refining centers in the world. I think Shell came here over a century ago. But beyond refining, and I think those of you who are in business will know, in fact, the margins on refining are very slim. So much so that recently, I think Shell even had to, on its books, write off the Bukom refinery, although clearly that refinery is continuing to operate. But the reason that refinery is continuing to operate is also because we developed a petrochemical sector, which takes the products of the refining, builds it up into value-added products, and again addresses a global need. So the point is that even in energy, a place with zero energy, zero natural resources, has been able to find a niche to create global opportunities. In the case of Singapore, we don't subsidize energy. Everybody pays full price for water and energy. There are no fossil fuel subsidies. Paradoxically, perhaps, this has in fact turned out to be precisely the right strategy for dealing with climate change. You see, far more money is spent subsidizing fossil fuel, even today, than spent on mitigation or on research and development for a carbon-free future. It's very ironic. If in fact governments all over the world stopped subsidizing fossil fuels, and therefore companies had to pay the full price for using fossil fuels, there would be a reallocation, a reprioritization of energy sources. But anyway, more about that later. The point I'm making is that all countries all over the world are going to confront a more brittle, a more volatile, greater challenges on the environmental front. These challenges are going to be increasingly manifest in storms, floods, droughts. And Mr. Chan Rai, whose family founded Olam, will tell you the next implication of all this is going to be on food prices. And food is something which human beings have to take very seriously. And if you want to start a revolution in most places, it's when there's a lack of food or when food prices run away. So the point is that the past trajectory for the past 250 years, industrial revolution, urbanization, cheap natural resources, cheap fossil fuel energy, great wealth being made just by scraping resources literally off the ground. that trajectory is not sustainable, and in fact is going to bring us into a far more uncertain and difficult world. So therefore, in the face of all that, the question has to be, how do you convert those risk factors into opportunities for economic growth and sustainable social development? That's the two key things which I wanted to leave with you. The third point which I wanted to leave with you was about the role of academic institutions, the role which universities like James Cook can play in solving these challenges, in converting risks and constraints into opportunities. And one example is that, in environmental science, in energy and in water, all the key breakthroughs are not going to occur deep in the silos of our individual disciplines. In fact, most fundamental discoveries will occur in interdisciplinary areas, at the boundaries between disciplines. And we need companies, we need institutions and universities to set up an academic and intellectual milieu where interdisciplinary research can go on, fundamental discoveries can get made, and then to take those discoveries from the lab into the real world. There will be countries like Singapore who, because of necessity, will be more than happy to offer ourselves as, as a place to prototype new discoveries, to upscale these prototypes into national solutions, as what we did for water and reverse osmosis, and then to seek economic opportunities from translating fundamental discoveries, research and development into products and services. So I want to encourage James Cook to continue to pursue this area of research. I was intrigued just now to discover that, in fact, you've been here physically present in Singapore for 10 years. I think you said, with 34 students in psychology, and today you have over 3,000. That's tenfold increase in 10 years. That's a remarkable rate of growth. I noticed that 1/3 are psychology, clinical psychology, and I think you shouldn't knock psychologists because in this uncertain world, even if you take the area of, say, economics, there's a whole emerging field now in behavioral economics, which requires both psychological and economic insights to be brought to bear to help policymakers in government decide, how do we structure programs, incentives or disincentives, laws, or even in other policy areas, so that it actually makes a difference, it alters behavior, alters business practices, so that we can get a more sustainable world and sustainable and fair economic growth. So the point is that you and other academic institutions have a major role to play in this, and I want to encourage you to do so. So let me conclude by saying that we live in uncertain and exciting times. The environment is just one arena in which major risks are going to confront humanity all over the world in the decades to come. You already know those risks are already occurring. They're already manifesting themselves in hurricanes, typhoons. The second wave, the impact on the economy, on food prices, water shortages. That's the next chapter. But my point is that even in the midst of all this, there's going to be great opportunities, and I think great wealth generated in the future from clean tech and environmental engineering. And my final point is that universities and academic institutions have a critical role to play in making the necessary discoveries to generate the solutions which hopefully responsible governments will implement and will have to implement, because that's what our people demand of us, that's what they expect. So thank you very much for your attention. I've noticed they've cleared the first course. Well, I hope you get the second course before the next talk. Thank you all very much.
Well, we'd like to thank the Minister for your powerful insights, and we look forward to hearing more from you later. Next is a speech by Professor Mike Kingsford, and he will continue on the theme of the global environmental impacts of business, some of its challenges and strategies. Right? Prof. Mike first.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the Minister on a fantastic foundation to this particular dialogue. Look, today is all about working together, talking about challenges and strategies that we face. I'm going to build on some of the themes that the Minister has already articulated. First of all, this is a reminder of where we are. Remember, on a tiny little planet in the middle of the solar system, the atmosphere is only something like 100 kilometres thick. It's pretty fragile, and there's a lot of us. In fact, if you look at the trend in population growth since 1770, we start off with under a billion people rather. By 1850, it's just over 1 billion. By 1950, you're up around 3 billion. As of yesterday, it was over 7 billion, so that's out of date. And by 2050, at the end of the century, we're talking about between 9 and 10 billion. That's a lot of people. So what do I want to articulate today? First, to address the grand challenges faced by society, which has already been touched on by the Minister. Now, global trends and public perception. Now, this is the very nature of business, is how our potential clients actually see us and how we actually behave. And this should have a great influence on how businesses actually operate, and we'll discuss that in more detail. I think it's very easy to be negative about the nature of the world and where we're all going. A focus I will have is on opportunities for business and how we can actually make money out of this and do the right thing by the environment. Of great interest to JCU is input from this particular assembly of people is what does business think the necessary skill base is that graduates need to actually give you a 5-star rating in terms of the way you go about your business. So we want to really provide the opportunity to be a collaborator in this space, working with business to provide the right skills for what you do. So what are the grand challenges? This is an obvious one. CO2 levels are rising. You look at 1800, we're about 280. By 1950, it was under 320. A rapid increase in growth after the Second World War. In fact, last month, we're up to 401. Now, this is not natural CO2. This is not coming from natural sources. We absolutely know this is man-made CO2 based on the signature. In fact, if you look from 1990 to 2013, man-made emissions increased by 62%. In fact, last year, we released 38 billion tonnes of CO2 into the atmosphere. And again, it's largely from fossil fuel. You can tell by isotopic signature. So with population growth, our thirst for energy grows annually. World consumption of coal increased 54% from 2000 to 2010. Some of the big consumers worldwide have increased by over 100%. Deforestation is another huge issue. We're losing tropical rainforest ecosystems at an unprecedented rate. Why does this matter? Well, first of all, for ecosystem health. Those forests are incredibly important as a huge CO2 sink, taking it out of the atmosphere, which we need oh so much. Species richness is dropping off dramatically as a result of the loss of those ecosystems. And a whole range of ecosystem services, which can be everything from tourism to timber to local fisheries and a whole range of other things. Overfishing, we know of the most ocean ecosystems worldwide are suffering a phase shift. We're losing all the big things, so the fish get smaller every year and the ecosystems are compromised. This is a major threat to sources of protein. Development that compromises ecosystems. If we don't do this right, it causes habitat destruction, loss of biodiversity, nutrient pollution, which affects other aspects of our lives, and also reduced fisheries. Air pollution, again touched on by the Minister. What are the major sources of this? Well, clearly the energy producers are a major source, transport, industry in terms of the production of goods. Certainly if you look across Asia, there's a trend for increased levels of air pollution. The mega cities are some of the worst. I'd have to say, looking at Singapore yesterday in terms of your pollution map, your PSI was quite admirable as well, well into the good, but I think under 50 units PSI. Air pollution affects human health, even the integrity of construction with some of the acids that can come into the atmosphere, marine and terrestrial ecosystems. The public is aware of these issues, and I think this is where the debate focuses back onto business, is at the end of the day, the clients know what's going on there. And there's an increasing intolerance by the public for wastage and bad environmental behaviour. So some of the emerging issues for societies are as follows. Concerns about climate change, let's get this right, and related carbon neutral business. Increased urbanisation, loss of ecosystems, this worries our clients. The need for environmental design to create resilient buildings, landscapes, cities and regions. Food security and health in a changing world. So does an environmentally friendly approach alter consumer behaviour? Look, I think it does. For example, consumers want this in terms of energy rating, not this. They want renewable energy, not just burning fossil fuels, where this is a huge current turbine on the right based on tidal currents. In fact, if you look at the graph there coming from JCU's State of the Tropics report, which I'll mention later on in the talk, if you look at the billions of kilowatts, life in the tropics here, there's a real opportunity because the number of kilowatts produced by alternate energy in the tropics is actually quite low compared to the rest of the world. There's a business opportunity for sure. Consumers want to see sustainable fisheries and to minimise bycatch. And what do I mean by bycatch? Well, that might mean catching dolphins in your tuna. For example, a huge marketing ploy here on your tin of tuna is dolphin-friendly tuna. That's a marketing ploy. It works. So they've done good business by actually sound environmental practice. When you run your aquaculture facility, don't pollute the local waterways and the solutions for that. So you can have good business and you can actually create other businesses, which I'll actually articulate in a second. If you have an airline, hey, how about biofuel? This is what Virgin Airlines is going for right now, is that you can suck your CO2 into a biofuel like algae. You stick it into your A380 Airbus on the right-hand side over here. It burns the CO2. But at the end of the day, CO2 in equals CO2 out, so there's no net gain. That's carbon neutral travel. Wouldn't every company love to say they do that? That's a great signature for your company. People want rainforests, not furniture. They want this on the left, they don't want that on the right. So astute companies, I think, are very careful, even where they buy their furniture. So if it comes from a Borneo rainforest, people are going to scowl. If it comes from Pinus radiata, from a plantation where it doesn't matter, they're going to look upon that favourably. I want biofuel. There can be traps in this. You want to be careful where you get this. If the production of biofuel is causing strong environmental impacts, then there can be negative consequences to business. And here's an example here. Look, you do not want your clients thinking you're responsible for this. In Borneo, 1950, on the left-hand side, lots of green stuff. 2010, a huge percentage of the land mass has actually lost its forest. That's a real problem globally as well as regionally. And of course, for Singapore yourself, you're affected by fires that come from local islands around here from bad practice. Does it matter? This is a really interesting debate for this room to consider. Does it matter what type of business you are? I don't think it does. I think no matter, and this group here is fantastic in terms of diversity. I don't think it matters whether you're a banker, you run a food industry, an airline, a construction business. It affects all of us. Even if you're a banker, for example, where does your company invest? Is it investing in the wrong companies? Will you be had up for a bad environmental signature of what you do? Where you buy your materials and supplies for? One of our professors, Bill Lawrence, spoke at a talk fairly recently where he said that Malaysian Pulp and Paper lost two of their key clients. That was Officeworks and Woolworths because of the way they actually mill the timber without sustainable practices. So you can lose your clients. Does your company have a carbon neutral footprint? Do you have energy efficient water and conserving practices? Do you have building practices that minimise damage to the environment? Now, all of these latter ones are a sort of sense of membership and ownership within the company to make this work. And all of that actually transmits to the greater community that, you know, your company is really concerned about the way you do business. And I think that can actually ultimately make you more money. So at the end of the day, there's an increasing demand for sensible and sustainable world stewardship in the way that we actually take care of the planet. And the jargon term these days is earth stewardship, which you'll see quite often. Now look, here's some, everyone loves a graph like that in business. Here's some opportunities. I've got some examples from JCU about some of these types of solutions. So one of the things we've been doing research-wise, which the Minister was flagging, is, you know, these are the real opportunities. We've been using micro and macro algae to make biodiesel. So we're not planting palm oil and soy oil, which, you know, you have to tear down rainforest to plant it. You can put this on wasteland to actually suck in CO2 and take it out of the atmosphere. You can either bury it or use it for something else. Here's an experiment done at a power station in Australia, Tarong, where there's the big patch on the left-hand side beside the power plant is a whole bunch of algal broths there absorbing CO2 from the flume to take it out of the atmosphere. So it's reducing CO2 from that power plant. Now this is quite complex. Let me nurse you through this. Now, this is, talking about this research from JC is fantastic because it's just got so many treats in it. If we look at the little picture on the left, what comes out of a big power plant? You have effluent, CO2 and sunlight. You know what loves that stuff? Is algae. Algae absorbs it, loves it. So what the power plant's concerned about is treating the effluent, recycling the water and sending it back into the power plant on the left-hand side there. But you can make products out of it. See the algal arrow to the right-hand side? Algal biofuels. Here you go. This is Virgin Airlines' solution. In fact, we've got Boeing talking to us now about getting fuel for their own jets. Algal oils and plastics. 3D printers use these plastics. Here's another business opportunity. Algal oils, a whole feast of those. Animal feed, that can actually stop flatulence in cattle. Remember, methane is one of the biggest polluters in the atmosphere. Aquaculture, that can reduce the parasite loads in some of your fish. Biochar, you might say, what on earth is that? Well, you actually heat algae up to about 90 degrees, you put it on a paddock and it holds nutrients. So when you're running your big food enterprise for vegetables and all the rest of it, you can stop nutrients being running off the land by having biochar there to hold on to it and have a slow release. Fertiliser, they've done that for years with seaweed. Human nutrition. There's a worldwide shortage of omega-3 fatty acids. You know those tablets we all take to make our joints work? Well, that's that stuff, and you can get it from algae. So there's all of that column on the right-hand side are business opportunities resulting from sequestering CO2 into seaweed on waste land. So a huge range of opportunity. Oh, look, I love this one. Look, I know the arrow is a bit suggestive, but we'll move over to the right here. If we look at, first of all, here's a polluted river on the left-hand side. I won't say where. Their problem was selenium, which is a nasty pollutant. We used algae to actually get rid of the selenium, so to take it out of the water. Now, the great thing is that it's an essential nutrient to cattle. Now, so for areas of the world where you have a shortage of selenium for your cattle, you can take it from polluted water, so you kill two birds with one stone. You've solved the pollution problem and you've helped the nutrient issue with your cattle. So again, another opportunity, quite a surprise, gives you a great environmental signature. So look, this is you guys. You're the ones in the middle there. I probably recognise the faces. Let's get this right. Down the bottom. Now, this again is a sense of ownership for the whole company. How do we operate? When the boss flies first class to London and we want it to be carbon neutral, we're either going to fly on Virgin Airlines or use biofuels, or we're going to plant a lot of trees to take that CO2 out of the atmosphere. On the right-hand side here, when we build, you're going to be careful about how we build, with the energy rating of our buildings, with the water usage. In fact, I saw a great thing in, it was Texas just recently, where they're using the water off the air conditioning and they were capturing the water dribbling off the air conditioning and using that to actually water their gardens. Okay, so that's all about how we operate. On the left here is how do we make money? Well, on the left-hand side there, we've got aquaculture. We'll stop polluting our local waterways by growing algae. The result of that is we can sell the algae and make a whole lot of profit on the algae. We're going to do R&D over here. We're going to get a tax break and we're going to create new products of a whole range of things. So to me, that personifies the future. To give you that star rating in the top right there, with a sense of ownership about the company, as every employee in the company knows you've got a fantastic signature in terms of how you operate, you will attract good people as a result. So when you recruit people to your company, they'll be saying, you know what, I want to work with this company because they've got that 5-star rating. And I think that's really important. So how do we build human capital that is relevant to good business with a robust theme of Earth stewardship? Our graduates could look like that, I guess. And look, I think that's where it comes to the assembled mass, which is very much how do we get the mix of skills right? Now, as academics, we can guess, but I don't think that helps a lot without input from industry. So the model we want is a mix of input from you guys and mix that with institutions like JCU that have a strong academic reputation and capability to deliver. So does JCU have that? Look, I think we do. We're ranked in the top 5 universities in the tropical world for research performance in environmental science, ecology, plant and animal science, coral reefs and geosciences. We're the world's leading institution for coral reef biology and ecology. We're one of the top universities in the world that focuses on tropical aquaculture. We rank 3rd in the world for publications in Science and Nature, which are very salubrious journals, and 2nd in the world for climate change research behind the Smithsonian. Now what we've done, this is an experiment to try and get it right with business. We've started a program to deliver graduates with skills to assist businesses in a changing world with a combination of our reputational environmental science and business programs. So, look, we've called it the Bachelor of Business and Environmental Science. It's quite long to write on your business card, but that's all we think of at the time. The idea is there's a couple of pathways. If you take the top line there, you can go straight into a bachelor's, or you can articulate through some of our collaborators like Republic Polytech, where you might come into year 2 of the program. So what are the core skills? And look, tell us if these are right or wrong. So some of the core skills might be to integrate and apply a coherent body of theoretical and technical knowledge in the disciplines of business and environmental science with in-depth insustainability principles and tropical contexts. Secondly, critically appraise the role and relevance of environmental science in international, regional and local business practice and society. Thirdly, organise, analyse and interpret business and scientific data using mathematical, statistical and technological skills. And finally, identify, analyse and generate solutions to unpredictable or complex problems. Now that's pretty nasty, but here's the nature of the degree, is the bottom part is environmental science, the top part is business. And if you look here, sustainability underlined, that's a capstone subject. So the idea is to integrate business and environmental science to tell students how to actually address problems. When they do something like sustainable aquaculture, it's not much point if it takes you $1,000 to raise one Asian sea bass. You've got to have some business skill as well. So the idea is to actually integrate that sort of thing. When you're looking at managing coastal marine environments, you know what? The business has to work. So it's having the environmental sensitivity when you make your developments to understand the local ecosystem as well. And that's the ethos that goes with that. So the dialogue that we want to continue today is, you know, we'd like people in this room to be part of an advisory committee. We'd like students to have the opportunity to experience, you know, life in the workforce in terms of building that skill base. We want you guys to tell us whether these guys have the right skills. You know, are we providing what is good for business? Is it sponsoring students, including upskilling of employees? I mean, it's supposed to be lifelong learning now, remember. So, you know, some of you might say to your employees, you know what, we want you to upskill in this area, and here's an opportunity, or maybe postgraduate studies. And we're all ears to hear what else we should do. Maintaining the dialogue beyond today, we can all have a great lunch and go our separate ways, but look, we don't want that. We want to maintain the engagement. There's going to be more of these Captains of Industry Luncheon series where, you know, I'd suggest that you actually talk to Dale about other speakers you'd like, how to actually create great engagement. We're also launching a pet baby of our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Sandra Harding. We'll be launching the State of the Tropics document, which is really the context of the tropics in terms of everything that happens in the tropics. And of course, even Southeast Asia here, you're responsible for, was it 33% of global GDP, so a major contributor to this part of the world. So look, finally, there are things we probably can't control, but good Earth stewardship is within our grasp through collaboration, and that's what we want to continue for the rest of the event. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. So what we'll do is that we'll just pause for about 10 minutes. We want our speakers to have a wonderful lunch. And then while you're taking your lunch, you have food for thought. Then in about 10 minutes' time, we'll commence with the Q&A, which we'll do it for about 30 minutes. So I think we have about 10 questions. So during your lunch, please give some food for thought and some of the questions you may want to ask the minister and also Professor Kingsford. So while you're thinking about your question, Minister and Professor Kingsford, if I can start off with my question first, yeah? To the Minister, my question is, why should businesses be concerned on global climatic issues, particularly when there are costs that are involved? Because sometimes, would this be a competitive issue if some countries implement and some don't? And how do we or countries or national organizations ensure a level playing field? Right? So that is my first question for the Minister. And to Professor Kingsford, with the prognosis of the deteriorating climatic conditions, can companies and countries effectively reverse it? Because sometimes it sounds quite disheartening and also overwhelming, particularly when you talk to your children, it's so big up there, what can you do? Especially with global disasters that we see, such as in Philippines and in many countries. So these are the two questions I start off with, and then we'll start with the Q&A. But first, Minister, please.
Okay, thank you. That's a very wide-ranging question, which will take a long time to answer, so let me try to be as brief as possible. I think the first thing, all companies have to make money. Am I right? I mean, you're not a charity. You have to have a positive rate of return. There are shareholders whom you need to answer. The point then is that if you need to make money, you need to be viable. I think what all companies all over the world want, assuming you don't have an inside track, what you really want is a level playing field. And I think if you have a situation in the world where some countries have strict rules, for instance, if some countries are bound by obligations to lower carbon dioxide emissions, and other places have no rules, companies are going to engage in regulatory arbitrage. You're going to go to the regulations where they are under no liabilities, no impositions. And you cannot blame companies for maximizing the advantage. Well, by 2015, let's just use climate change as an example. By 2015, the world should have a new climate change regime with universal participation, that means all countries making nationally determined contributions. This is negotiators speak for making commitments, which will either limit or set a trajectory for carbon dioxide emissions for those countries, the respective countries. Having a global agreement is important because it creates a level playing field. Now, it's still premature to say exactly how ambitious that agreement is going to be, but clearly, if we are going to resolve climate change, it needs to be a sufficiently ambitious agreement. But regardless of how ambitious it is, the fact that there will be universal participation means I think companies have to start preparing for a post-2015 agreement, which will cover the period from 2020 onwards, in which you can't just escape to another part of the world where there are no rules, no regulations, no limits to environmental degradation or to carbon dioxide emission. So my point would be, better start preparing now. And then if you understand then that you have to start preparing now, then if you refer to Mike's speech, you better be aware of what the academic and technological advances are over the last few years and in the decade to come. and decide where your business opportunities will be. Because if you don't proactively reorientate your business strategy to deal with the risks on the environmental front, to deal with regulatory agreements made universally at a global level, and you don't take advantage of new discoveries, I think you'll find yourself at a competitive disadvantage in the future. So my point basically is be prepared that whether you like it or not, or appreciate it or not, change is underway. Change on the risk side, as well as regulatory change, which combined with technological advancement should provide you with opportunities. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Minister, for the answer. I think the key is there's nowhere to hide. Just as bankers, they used to go to many countries, including like Vanuatu, but now you can't go there, Okay, maybe we'll move on to Prof, right, for the second question.
Yes, I had to respond to doom and gloom, I believe. If you look at CO2 levels, clearly they're going up faster than most of the IPCC models are actually projecting. We also know that it'll take about 50 years, even if we stop right now, it takes about 50 years to purge it from the ocean, because the ocean's a great sump of CO2, so it takes a while to actually get that out. So how do we deal with this? Look, I should use Australia as an example. In Australia, getting to this mood of engaging with the public and potential clients, global climate change has become a huge political football in Australia. Firstly, we have one of the worst global signatures in terms of CO2 emissions. We also have one of the greatest rates of export of coal to other countries in the world. It has become a huge political football. It became so much so that the last government actually brought in carbon trading. Now, that actually was a tax on companies for their carbon signature. Now, I can tell you right now, every country in the world is looking at these types of things. So for businesses to be proactive, it'd be extremely sensible to be thinking about this now, not waiting for it to hit you. Now, that actually created opportunity in terms of R&D. So countries that were well aligned in terms of dealing with this got tax breaks in terms of taking on new and bold ideas, like some of this algal approach, for example, that I gave in my talk. So be ahead of the game would be my advice, and come up with those solutions now, and be at the coal front, because you'll make money out of it. If you get this right, every company will be saying, oh my God. Literally councils in Australia were saying, we've got a $2 million bill for carbon trading, for processing stuff at the rubbish tip and generating energy. That was the type of bills that were coming in. And as a result, therefore, they're looking at ways of actually cutting that. So again, it gets back to the Minister's comment about technology and thinking about that carefully now.
Okay, thank you. So we now are open to the floor. Yes. Okay, the first one first. Lim Kim Hai. Okay, Kim Hai.
Hi, my name is Lim Kim Hai. I have an airline in Australia that's called Rex. Probably many Australians here would have heard of it. My question is for the Minister, and sorry, Bill, I cannot keep it brief.
Okay.
I have a few comments, Minister, to make. I appreciate very much all the effort that the government has done in terms of providing Singapore with energy independence, and I think they have done a wonderful job. But there are other areas I think the government is not walking the talk. For example, you mentioned that the government should look at some of the technologies that have been produced and see if you could implement it countrywide. There's a very old technology called solar panel. It has been done more than a decade ago, but to today, the government has not done a single thing to encourage normal households to put up solar panels, even though the sun energy is so abundant in Singapore. Recently, I've taken the temperature of what it is outside, not in the shade, and I found that the temperature is 45 degrees. So that goes to show how much abundant energy we have. And different from the Australian government, the Singapore government has not given any subsidy for installation of solar panels, and these are expensive. And what is even worse, which I find quite outrageous, I have taken the effort to install solar panel in one of the houses that I've built. And I found on my bill that the government pays me 20 cents per kilowatt hour that I produce, but it charges me 25 cents for what I consume. In Australia, it's the opposite. I've also installed solar panels in Australia, and not only do I get a generous subsidy, the government actually, in many cases when you sign up, you have a reduction in your tariff compared to what they charge you. So here we have a government that proclaims that it's all for sustainable energy. Here we have abundant energy, and yet it seems that the government is trying to make money on the few people who would be willing to invest, because I'm sure you have done the sums. The payback is at least 8 years. Who would want to invest for a payback in 8 years? Another example, you look at the lights that we have here. You probably realize that these are incandescent lights. I think the Australian government 3 years ago or 4 years ago, with the stroke of a pen, banned all incandescent light in Australia. Singapore, we banned chewing gums, but we didn't have the courage to say, why don't we do something for energy? Why don't we do something for the world? Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, you know that we are off to a great start. Okay. Minister, you want to answer first? Or
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful
okay.
question.
Okay.
I first met Kim Hai on a mountaintop in Whistler, I think more than about a decade ago. And he told me at that time how he was taking a very unusual route of investing in what I think was a bankrupt airline. And he was going to turn it around. And today it's a success story in Australia. So it just shows you what a small world this is. Kim Hai, I'm very glad you brought up this issue. And I'm going to need some time to answer, but I think he's brought up many basic philosophical points that need to be addressed. Let me start with the science. Actually, contrary to popular belief, the world's sun belt, that means where you get the most radiant energy, is not the tropics, but actually a little bit north and south of the tropics. And the reason for that is this thing called clouds. All right, so if you really want to install solar panels, I'm talking about on a global level, I would install them in the great deserts of Australia. I would put it in the Gobi Desert, in the Sahara. It's not strictly where the equator is. First point, from a pure science point of view. Second point is that you're absolutely right. So the price of solar panels have collapsed in the last 10 years. And every time it comes down, the people selling solar panels will say, we're almost there, we're almost at grid parity. Now, the concept of grid parity is very important, because when you achieve grid parity, meaning your full costs, your full long-run marginal costs of generating solar energy is cheaper than the electrons you receive from the grid, you don't need any subsidies. You don't need any government policies. It'll make complete business sense to install solar panels. Well, the problem is, and I've been in this business now long enough, every year someone promises me we are at grid parity. But every year, people ask for government support and subsidies. So the fact that this has not yet happened shows us that the two curves, the cost of generating solar energy and the cost of selling you electrons based out of fossil fuel, together with all the fossil fuel subsidies I mentioned just now in my speech, the two curves have not yet met. They're coming very close, but not yet met. Then it brings up to this interesting point that you'll notice I said grid parity. And there's a reason why I say that. I don't know whether any of you here run power generate power.
Yeah, Wang Kim Yen is here, Sing Power.
Right? Okay. Well, guess what? The cost of him generating that electron, he also has to send that electron via the grid. In the case of Singapore, it's underground cables. In the case of Australia, it's overhead cables. Occasionally, those cables fall down and start forest fires. That's a different story. But the point is that the true cost of delivering that electron at your doorstep is not just what the power generator takes, but also the grid cost. In Singapore, when we charge, I think it's 20, let's say 25. I think it's a bit less than that now, but let's say 20. Okay, let's just use 25. It's a nice round number. It includes both the GenCo and the grid costs. So you pay that. Now, the next question then comes is that when you install a solar panel and you're competing with him, are you selling an electron or are you selling an electron that has passed through the grid? And the answer at your doorstep where you connect with the grid is that you are no different from a GenCo generating electrons. So there is actually a difference in the price or in the cost between an electron arriving at someone else's house and an electron leaving my own solar panel installation. You are quite right. In Singapore, as a general rule, we have not subsidized home users installing solar panels. There's an exception to that I'll come to later. But generally, you install the solar panels, you're right, it'll take you about 7-8 years to recover capital costs. I think if you do it today, it'll be shorter because the price has fallen since you've installed it. But there has to be a difference between producing electron and transmitting an electron. Now, having said that, we then ask ourselves, okay, even if we want to be technology agnostic, which we as a philosophy, as a government philosophy believe in, that means we don't take bets that it must be solar energy or natural gas or wind or hydropower or geothermal. We are technology agnostic. But supposing we want to favor solar, how much solar energy could we generate in Singapore? So we said, well, okay, let's cover every single rooftop. And we came up with an estimate that even if we were to pay the additional costs, subsidize it and put on every single rooftop, we could generate maybe about 12% of our energy needs. Not a small number, but not a strategic number. It's not a game-changing number. So we said, well, we can't do that, but nevertheless, we said, we feel that this is an emerging technology and we want to get our hands dirty, so to speak. Because in fact, if you're into business, the real business opportunity in solar energy is not just making solar panels. In fact, many solar panel makers have gone bankrupt recently. It is in the systems integration. It is in the electronic control circuits, the smart circuits, smart grids that people are talking about. And in fact, we do want Singapore companies to be able to enter this space. So what we have done is we have certain solar leasing schemes, which some of our companies have taken advantage of. And if you go to some precincts in Punggol, we've got an eco precinct where we're doing pilot studies. You will see solar panels at the top of those HDB rooftops, where actually, although we say we don't subsidize, actually in effect there has been some form of, not capital, but financing subsidy. So what this company does is it goes to HDB and says, okay, what is your current electricity bill? I commit to undercut it. In exchange for that, I have a right to install panels. The company takes the financing risk. To HDB, you're just paying a flat rate, hopefully a lower rate than what you would otherwise pay. Government comes in to take some of the risk. Otherwise, the company will never even start these solar leasing schemes. So some of this has occurred and some subsidies are available. But I'm trying to explain to you why we don't, as a nation, say we're going to subsidize everyone's installation of rooftops. It's also worth remembering in the case of Singapore, 90% of us live in apartments. If you live in an apartment, you're not going to have a rooftop to yourself to install the solar panels anyway. So, it cannot be a universally applied scheme. There's one more point, which is the difference between Australia and Singapore is that we are a tiny red dot, a city pretending to be a country, whereas Australia is a continent pretending to be a country. You see the big difference? It's called land area. So in Singapore, we are short of land. But nevertheless, because I'm in charge of water as well, we have just decided to start a pilot project where I'm going to float solar panels on reservoirs. Because I don't have land, but I have water. I can float it on reservoirs. I am sure it's going to be more expensive than installing panels in the desert of Australia. But nevertheless, let's try, let's learn, pick up some technological and business lessons from that. Let's also, and this will be relevant to Mike, study what impact that has on the ecosystems of reservoirs when you've got solar panels covering the water surface. On one hand, it's positive, it may reduce evaporative losses, but we're not totally sure about the impact on the ecosystem beneath that. So these are pilot projects which we're starting in a small way to make discoveries on. But I'm not yet ready to say, lay panels on every patch of water. Let's do this incrementally. Final point is political. In all countries, Australia, Germany, many other countries, that have decided to do feed-in tariffs. The reason why there's a difference in your price in Australia as opposed to Singapore, that reversal is not economic. That reversal is due to politics. Australia used to have, I don't know about now, used to have a feed-in tariff, which means they were paying you more for your electron at your doorstep than what it was really worth. Now, any country, every country that has a feed-in tariff, in effect what you're doing is you are taxing others who are buying electrons from the grid based on fossil fuels. You're taxing them more in order to give you, who's producing solar energy, a subsidy. Do you see the difference? Now, all countries in the world, the number of solar panel installations are a minority. So in effect, what you have is a situation where the majority of people who don't have big houses, who don't have big roofs, who don't have big land, are subsidizing the few who have the ability to produce more solar energy. Well, guess what? In democracies, one man, one vote, these feed-in tariffs are not politically sustainable. They're not tenable. They don't make economic sense, but more important, the politics will not allow that. That's why you will see in many of these countries, these feed-in tariffs are being withdrawn or being reduced. Because it's very easy for anyone opposed to this policy to stand up and say, look, how many of you here have got solar panels? Well, guess what? Do you know the rest of you are subsidizing that one with a solar panel? And votes get won. Now, I don't know whether media is present here, but let's face it, you just had an election in Australia. It was not the Greenies who won. So when push comes to shove, if you make a person decide right now, immediately, to be green or to save money, guess which way the politics will go. So the way we do it in Singapore is not sexy, it's not fashionable, but we do believe in policies that are grounded in science, on sound economics, and explaining it to people so that they understand why we're doing what we're doing. The reason we do it this way is that if and when, and I hope, that solar energy is the right way to go, it'll be Singaporean companies who are poised to take the opportunities because they can say, look, just like we did in water, the Singapore government didn't subsidize us. They pushed us to the limit, they tested us, we survived. This is our calling card. It works in Singapore. So sorry about the long answer, but it was a wonderful question. I just had to make sure I address the issues raised.
Right. Well, we're off to a great start. We have another question.
Sorry,
from Wong Kim Yin. Yeah.
Bill and Minister. My name is Kim Yin. I'm the Group Chief Executive of Singapore Power. I just wanted to resonate to Minister's point. One additional point that I wanted to develop a bit further is this concept of grid parity. We need to be clear that we're comparing apples to apples. When we say that to generate 1 unit of solar power, it costs you so many cents per kilowatt hours. it is very different than thinking through what it actually will cost the consumer. If you put a solar panel on your rooftop and you tell the grid company, I no longer need this wire coming to my home, I'm totally independent, then you're comparing it apples to apples with the case whereby you're using solar panel or you're not using solar panel and just having the wire coming to your home. But most people, because of technological constraint, because of the availability of sunlight, the availability of cheap storage for electricity, you need the wire coming to your home as a backup. So when you compare, when you say grid parity, yes, the solar panel manufacturer or the system integrator is going to tell you you are at grid parity. It may well be, in certain circumstances, but that is only in the case whereby you say that I do not need this wire coming to my home. The trouble is, from the grid company's perspective, they are charging you cents per kilowatt hours. When you have a solar panel on your rooftop and you collect fewer kilowatt hours from the grid company or from the power company, you're paying them less, and yet you want them to continue to give you the same quality of service when you need it. This is where in many developed markets where all these, the advance of the distributed generation is actually causing some of a very serious issue with the power companies. They're causing them to go bankrupt. Maybe they deserve to go bankrupt. Nothing wrong with that if they're not green, not sustainable, and so on. But I think as a consumer, we need to be clear, what is it that we are buying? Are we buying, if we need solar panel to be generating power for us, do we put in the additional investment in storage and batteries so that I can have power at night? And because of that, I will relieve the government, I will relieve the regulator, I will relieve the power company for bringing power to my home on that 5 minutes of the day when I need it. On the 5 hours of the day when I have no power from the sun, I can continue to enjoy my fan, my aircon, my TV, my internet. So I represent Singapore Power, which is, we are not a generator, we distribute power to homes. And I just...
You're the grid.
Yes, I'm the grid. And I wanted to take this opportunity to clarify this, and I'm glad that Minister put this point across also about fairness, because those people who can afford solar panels, they represent a very small percentage of the population. As a regulated business, I need to look after the interests of the vast majority of the population.
But I should point out that every kilowatt hour that Kim Hai produces and consumes at home, you are saving the full 25 cents. Plus the GST. So the point is, for someone like Kim Hai, please carry on installing panels. Okay. And in fact, it brings up the other technological breakthrough that is missing. You should invest in battery companies. Whoever can solve the issue of storage, that's where the next big revolution is in energy. So another business idea, in 10 years' time, you tell us about it.
And if I may, just one last point, that I think we are very supportive of renewables as contrast to some of my counterparts in overseas market. In Singapore, we're very sheltered. To Minister's point, we do not have the business being threatened by the incoming of renewables. So we see, Singapore Power certainly see these changes in technology and changes in regulation as an opportunity rather than as a threat to our business.
Okay, well, we got two more questions. One is from Prof, and the other one is from Onko, and then from Siva. Okay, Prof.
Minister, I really enjoyed...
Let's take the three questions at one time.
I enjoyed your speech. I thought it was terrific to learn about your story and the history around that. I'm interested in seeking your views out a few years. You said that Singapore was interested in testing new innovative products and so on, which around energy and so on. But I'd like you to perhaps comment a bit more on the red dot on the planet. Singapore is a red dot, but it's in a region, Asia-Pacific region, that has 30% of the world's GDP today. And the opportunities for solving critical problems, which are perhaps not necessarily based on physical solutions, but more on social science solutions around climate change, I think there's a terrific opportunity for Singapore to take a critical role in that space, perhaps through a think tank arrangement. Would you like to comment on that?
Yep. Okay, so maybe let's park this question for the Minister first. Pak Ong, yeah, you have one. Yep. We'll do 3 questions at one go.
Minister, good afternoon. My name is Seti Ong, an architect in practice. In 2001, I designed a house, a very big house, and the owner had to say that, oh, can you please make us a water tank where I can water the land? At that time, we were not allowed to do it. Then 10 years later,
We changed the rule.
yes, we actually encouraged to do it, and we prepare a water tank enough for 1 week watering. And then we take the water from the rooftop and all the way down. And with that kind of condition in Singapore, I'm very encouraged and pursuing the Singapore Power with regard to maybe there will be no more electricity where every house will have their own solar panel, because we are also doing now in our project with all the solar panels and so on. Perhaps the significance of the Singapore Power would be to provide the evening power rather than all the power that we have. I think these are all the continuity that one can look at, and we change the model. Even like the car with the car battery, the handphone, we are now no need to have the electrical connection. We can carry it everywhere with the lighting that we had for the traffic light and so on. It's all solar panel. I think it's not too far ahead and to say that maybe we can get rid of. In the old day, I must have a connection to the telephone at home. How many homes today, they devoid of all this physical phone, but we have just handphone. In fact, people prefer to have connection with the handphone. Thank you.
Okay, we go to the third one. Please state your question.
Good afternoon. This is Sriram Iyer from ANZ Bank. Professor Minister, very nice to hear you both speak. My question is, I was fascinated by your example of converting risk into opportunity, first of water, then of energy. Which is the third risk that you're now thinking about, on which you're actually losing sleep, which you think will become an opportunity in the future? And I also think on the side, Singapore should refer to itself as a green dot, not a red dot.
Okay. All right.
That's
okay.
true. Good point.
To you, Minister.
Yeah.
Yep.
First, I want to say, actually, the answer to all your 3 questions is yes. Right? I mean, should we have a think tank? Should we be looking? Yes, we should be. Your point on, I think it was on, first this issue of water. You're absolutely right. Would you believe 10 years ago we had a rule? And let me explain why we had this rule. We said every single drop of rain that falls on Singapore belongs to the PUB. You are not allowed to hoard it for yourself. So if an architect like him came along, we said, no, you cannot hoard the water. You must let it flow into the drain, which will flow into the reservoir, one of the 17 reservoirs. We'll treat it and then we'll sell it back to you. Well, we made a U-turn on that because it was the wrong policy. And let me explain why it was wrong. In Singapore today, we consume per capita about 151 liters of water per person. 151 liters. Now, I used to be a doctor, so let me tell you how many liters of water you actually need to stay alive. 3 liters. Okay, 3 liters. So, where does the other 148 liters go? Okay, you need, well, a shower takes 9 liters per minute, so depending on how long, and I think in Singapore we like our showers because it's a hot place. Right? But the point is, there's a lot of water usage which frankly does not require water which is good enough to drink, to be used. And for me to collect all that water, to treat it and pump it back to you, and then you use it to water your plants and your cars, is almost sinful. You agree? Yeah. So we reversed that policy. So those of you who want to build water tanks, and the Punggol Eco District, which I referred to, apart from solar panels, the water is also drained into tanks, which are then used for local landscaping. No need for it to come to PUB for treatment. So the point is that our policies, if they are wrong, makes good sense to reverse, we will reverse it. Don't worry about that. The other point you raise is actually a more interesting technological point, which is, do you see in the future a world of monopoly grids, or do you see a world of decentralized production? So for instance, in Kim Hai's case, I think you probably produce more energy than you consume. Or at least, your problem now is the day and night. The problem is not the same. But the moment you have energy storage, you would have solved the problem. In fact, if you think about it in the future, apart from solar energy, if everyone has a micro turbine running on natural gas in the future, you might be your own little Genco. You know? Think about it. Another example, you mentioned telephones, mobile telephones replacing landlines. Well, there are many parts of India and Africa which will probably skip the installation of landlines and grids and jump straight into mobile telephony. If you want to be even more radical, if you think about it, why is it today we need internet service providers and telecoms companies? Actually, in each of our pockets is an electronic device with Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and GSM. It is, even using today's technology, possible to do a peer-to-peer network, which bypasses central monopolistic grids. Because as long as my phone can connect to yours, and you can reach Jose, and Jose, can reach Harry, a network is already established that doesn't depend upon central monopoly. And in fact, that kind of peer-to-peer shared resources, there's a whole new economic space opening up. They call it the sharing economy, but if you think of it in terms of infrastructure, energy, telecommunications, and water, a whole distributed model of production, consumption, and sharing. I think there's a whole new economy out there, and I think it's going to be upon us within a decade, for both economic as well as political and social reasons. So in fact, you're on to something far more fundamental than just producing energy or just collecting your own water. Which brings to this point is, what do we see Singapore's role in all this? First, we have a realistic estimate. We know we are small, but because we now live in a world of the 7 billion human beings, 7 billion, right? 7 billion human beings. For the first time in human history, more than half of the 7 billion humans alive now live in a city. In the next 10 to 20 years, that figure will probably go to 70, 80%. And you ask yourself, why do people live in a city? Is it greener to live in a city or greener to live in the countryside? And here is where there's a counterintuitive point. If you really are a greenie, you should choose to live in a city. Why? The unit cost of supplying you drinking water, food, energy, jobs, entertainment, interaction, social amenities, the unit cost is lower in a dense, well-planned, connected city than it is in the outbacks of Australia, where the cost of supplying all these so-called essentials of life, the unit cost is far higher. So the point I'm making is that, in fact, a city life is the greenest and possibly most sustainable way of life for human beings in the future. So that's where we get into the game, you see. Because if we can show the world a sustainable way of life without subsidies and political shenanigans, an economy which is vibrant, and a society which is fair and equitable, we think that these models, you can't just transplant it wholesale, but there will be interesting business models, economic models, which will have a market elsewhere, because the number of cities are going to explode. in China, in India, in Africa. And these are where the future growth for the world is going to be. And so it's worth us planning carefully, incubating, connecting companies, universities, academics, and businessmen, generating solutions of the future. So there was a businessman from India. His name is Anand Mahendra of Mahendra and Sons, and he told me, actually for Singapore, all you need to do is position yourself in such a way that a visitor can come to Singapore and say, I have seen the future and it works. A working model of the future. If we can do that, we'll be relevant and we can continue to be useful to the rest of the world.
All right. Okay, so I think in the interest of time, we'll try to close in 5 to 10 minutes. And we have just time for 2 or 3 questions, if you got any, before we hit for the dessert for the official close. If you have questions, can you just state your questions? Okay, first Jonathan, and then Raymond, and then Kim Hai. Okay, please state your questions. Yep.
My name's Jonathan Glickfeld. I'm from a company called Vivian. We pioneered curbside recycling 30 or 40 years ago in Australia. My question is, does Singapore see the potential in, if it was able to reclaim some land, to be a waste sorting centre for the region?
Okay, right. So that's the question, right? Okay, Raymond, question, right? And then Kim Hai.
Right. Raymond Kwok Group LP and VC.com. Ministers, if we put a hand, we got 5 fingers. We understand that we have water security, energy security, food, and I think the 2 is air and cyber security, basically. There may be others, on the other hand. But let's just come back, because I understand that you are very much involved in water and that related to energy, exactly what you say, because water needs energy to produce. Can you share with us, water, we seems to have a solution by 2060. We seems to have that in managing for a small state. But how do we address the energy security 5, 10 years, 30 years, 60 years from now? Because I don't think we have our resources. One other thing I talk about and think about it is geothermal, which is secured, but you need to drill really deep down to be able to do it. Then tidal wave, maybe we can work with James Cook, because I think there is Scotland, I think there is some development there. So maybe you can share with us your vision, sir.
Okay, one last question, right?
No question, but just some food for thought for the architect as well as for minister. Rainwater can also be used for flushing toilets, and that's what I did when I built the house. I have a reservoir and I pump it to the top and I flush all the toilets. And I think that is probably something that Singapore can consider as well.
You probably did it illegally first, right? Anyway, it's legal now.
Okay, this is off the record. Okay, Minister, we got the 2 questions you want to address. Yep.
Okay. Sorry, I was
Jonathan's
distracted
question.
by
the reclaimed land, right?
Yeah. We've run out of land in Singapore. Even reclamation, we've reached the limits of our territorial, so we can't go far beyond. And in fact, it's precisely for that reason we don't even have a landfill site on Singapore Island anymore. What we have is Pulau Semakau, and we incinerate all our waste so that it becomes less than, I think certainly less than 10% of the original volume. And then we put that bottom ash into Pulau Semakau. But even Pulau Semakau will have a time limit. And right now we've got a phase 2 expansion, so I've just bought another 30 years. So I think we're good for another 50 to 60 years, right? But your point that we need to manage, reduce, reuse, and recycle is absolutely spot on, particularly in a place like Singapore. So your question is, can we be a regional center for dealing with other people's waste? I think if it's phrased as in looking at processing other countries' waste, that won't fly. But I think there's an exception to that. Because I think we got to get out of this paradigm that this is waste disposal. I think we have to adopt the paradigm of resource management. And yes, and if you believe that we're going towards a resource-constrained world with higher commodity prices, then the lithium in the batteries, the nickel, the cadmium, today things which you think of as toxic, as heavy metals, selenium, if you start understanding that in fact those are resources and that you have a choice between trying to mine it off the earth or recycling it from products which you have used, at some point I believe the curves will meet and it will be economically viable in its own right to mine natural resources from the so-called waste disposal channels. At that point, you will have resource loops, resource cycles, and I think businesses like what you are envisaging will have a role. But are we there yet? We're not there yet. Unfortunately, people still think it's, it's incredible, right? But it's still cheaper to mine rare earths, taking up soil from Australia, sending it to Malaysia, putting it in a plant there, rather than to recycle all our electronics, which are the main users of rare earths. So we live in a crazy world where the economics and the price signals are not getting us to do the scientifically right thing. But I hope that eventually prices will correct. Now, that's a business opportunity. You have to figure which way prices are going to go. And with that will come new technologies and new opportunities. Your point about our insecurities, well, like I said, basically water now is an energy play. So the key issue is energy. Two things have occurred in the last decade. The first is this switch. We used to use fuel oil, heavy sulfur fuel oil, to generate electricity. About 10 years ago, the economics in an unsubsidized way meant that actually natural gas was the way to go. It also happens to be more environmentally friendly. And in Singapore, because we took an economically robust approach to that, in fact, and the power generators will attest to this, we stranded many steam plants that were using fuel oil. If we were just to look at it as a shareholder, we would have said, no, don't allow this technological change to come, because it means all my steam plants using oil would be written off the books straight away. We didn't fight this. We just said, don't fight the market. Let the economics and the science work through. And today, I think it's about nearly 90% is generated. Am I right? 90? Higher than 90% is generated from natural gas. More efficient, more green. But then the question of security and reliability came in because we had two pipelines, both from a neighbor. And that leaves us in a position where we're only price takers. And in any case, even our neighbor is going to run out of fossil fuels, both our neighbors. Indonesia is no longer a member of OPEC because it's no longer a net oil exporter. Natural gas is also a finite resource until, I suppose, the South China Sea is resolved, who gets the gases there. But that is one key reason why we opened a LNG terminal. And the PM himself opened it. And why at the recent opening, PM also announced that we're going to build a second terminal in the east. Because the LNG terminals allow us then to buy gas from literally anyone, anywhere in the world. It's to buy us time, bargaining leverage, and security. So we will continue to be buyers of natural gas. What about the other methods? Well, solar, as I said, we should continue to chase. As the price comes down, as the efficiency goes up, as new technologies break through, we will see more. But it will never replace, we don't expect that in the foreseeable future it will become the key provider of energy for us. We looked at all the other things. The best place in Southeast Asia for geothermal energy is not Singapore. It's actually Indonesia, because they're on the Pacific Rim of Fire. It's where all your volcanoes and earthquakes are. It's the best place to get geothermal energy. So it's not likely to figure in any major way in Singapore. Similarly, the difference between Singapore and Hong Kong, or Singapore and Philippines, is that we don't have typhoons and hurricanes. I mean, we have occasional twisters, but, nothing. The fact is, Singapore as a harbor came about because it's a very low wind, safe harbor. And even the tides don't vary as much in Singapore. So unfortunately for us, wind energy and even tidal energy does not have as much potential for us as it has for other countries. So we recognize that we classify ourselves as alternative energy disadvantaged. There are limits to all the other available forms. Nuclear, not possible using current technology, because the moment an accident occurs, the exclusion zone will be the entire Singapore. Right? I mean, you think, if Fukushima occurred in Changi, it's end of this. So even nuclear is not possible. But if in future there are smaller, safer technologies invented, we want to keep an eye out. And that's why we also announced that we will invest in research facilities, so that we've got to make sure we have some Singaporeans who understand this technology and can see what new applications will arise in the future. The holy grail for nuclear energy actually is fusion energy. Nuclear energy divides into fusion and fission. Fission is uranium, plutonium, all that. You split an atom and you generate energy. Fusion is you take two hydrogen atoms, you combine them into helium, that produces energy. So far in the world, the only time that has been produced is during thermonuclear explosions in bombs. No one has yet been able to commercially produce fusion energy. But if and when that is invented, the person who succeeds in doing that is going to be a huge multi-billionaire, because that will completely upend the energy equation. And with the energy equation, you upend water, you overturn food, transportation. That will be a whole new world. So between batteries and fusion energy, there's some potentially exciting global things that could happen. And pardon? Thorium reactors are fission reactors. They are smaller. They're supposed to be safer. It is something which we will look at. I think right now China is trying to do a lot on that. So again, my approach to this is that it's unlikely that a little red dot like Singapore will be the first place in the world to invent all this. But we can be early adopters, we can be prototypers, we can show what is technologically possible and economically viable and environmentally sustainable. If we can pull that off, I think we're all right. We're in the game, and we keep this little red dot or green dot going for a few more decades. And that's how that's our approach. So we don't get everything right straight away, but we try, and we will get better with time. Thank you. Thank you all.
Well, I think, we wish we have more time for questions, but we have got to come to an end. And maybe just before we close sort of formally, before you go for your dessert, can I just ask Prof. Mike and also Minister if there's any last words you want to sort of give to conclude? Yeah, maybe we'll start with you first, Mike. Yeah? I don't think I've got anything further to say. Okay, Mike. Yeah.
I think the any last words is very much collaborating on this.
Okay.
To me, talking to organisations like JCE to actually engender this sense of belonging in companies, that if you're going to go forward in this sort of space, is you need to have like a legendre within the company that everyone is partaking. From the highest, the CEO, right down to the more lowly members of the organisation, and having a horizontal playing field in terms of the perception that's really important to the company. Once that's there, you'll actually attract even better employees, because actually people recognise and admire your company for what you do. And as I hope we've flagged today, there's lots of business opportunities. And if you're astute at looking at politics and the medium to long term, you realise the writing is on the wall, that you really have to align in this sort of space to make money in a sensible way in the long term. I think that's probably the take-home message from me.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much, Minister and Prof. Mike. And we'll end this Q&A. So we invite you for the dessert, and this comes to a formal end. Thank you very much for coming.